Top of the hour, putting the U in HBCU. We are HSRN. You are listening to Green Talk for Brown Folks with Ryan Marshall on HSRN.
Hello, everybody. It's another episode of Green Talk for Brown Folks with your host, Ryan Marshall. I'm so excited to be back here with you for another great episode. And I feel like it's going to be a great episode today. I really tried hard to get all of my thoughts together for this one. I took notes, which is something that I do for most of my shows anyway. But I'm just trying to keep this organized so that way I get sort of my point across. And we may have to have a couple of different shows to talk about this. But today's episode is going to be talking about creating a lasting legacy. And this was the week that we celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, and we talked about all of those things that comes along with trying to fight for equity and equality and that lasting legacy. What is our lasting legacy? You know, Dr. King had a lasting legacy of peace, fighting for civil rights and voting rights and all of those things like that, and making sure that Black people were able to be afforded the same that the rest of Americans were afforded. And so we talk about our lasting legacy. What is our lasting legacy? For African Americans? And I will go out, and I don't know if this is so much as a hot take, and I will say that African Americans, while we're moving the needle a little bit as a group, as a people, I don't feel like the needle is being moved enough. And we're still here. 1960s, we were talking about voting rights. 2022, we're talking about voting rights. And the Republican, the GOP Senate filibustered and killed the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We're still trying to talk about those things. We're talking about equity and equality as it pertains to policing in America. We're talking about money and financial equity and equality. And I'm trying to get my thoughts together on this. And I believe we start talking about what is our lasting legacy as a people. We have to do what we can do in the community individually as a family. Our individual families, we have to find ways to move the needle for our family because, like they said, it takes a village. It takes everybody, not just a bunch of people at the top, the leaders, but it takes the entire village to move forward. Now, there's a point to what I'm saying here, and I really want to make this point. Financially, it's so very important. A lot of Black people, a lot of communities of color are still going through the same issues financially. While we're making more money, while we have more opportunities because the toils of systemic racism is slowly but surely coming off, and more African Americans have greater access to success and higher paying jobs and opportunities and entrepreneurship and things like that. The wealth gap is widening. Now, why is that? The wealth gap is widening. There was a recent study that showed that it was done, I think, either last year or the year before in 20 or 21, that the average wealth of white families is 10 times that of Black families. Now, how is it that African Americans are making more money, that are living in better neighborhoods, that are going to better schools, and kids are getting better jobs and better education, and the gap is widening? That's where we get into creating and talking about leaving our lasting legacy. And there are things that I don't believe that we are doing that we need to do in order to make it easier and or create a pathway to making leaving that lasting legacy. One of the things we talk about in decreasing that racial wealth gap is being able to pass and create wealth for our generations, not just for us. In this generation, it is so very important that we help to decrease the racial wealth gap in our families. One of the biggest ways, and we talk about that a lot, in doing that is you can change the game. There is twofold, and I've talked about this in previous shows before, but I had to come back to this again in this lasting legacy because I believe it's so very important, is through life insurance and taking care of your kids' college education. Now, there are a lot of people in our community that shy away from having this conversation about life insurance. It's all about investing in stocks and mutual funds and ETFs and cryptocurrency, Bitcoin and all those. And I get that. And we'll have that discussion. That's important to have that. But when you're talking about creating a legacy and passing that on, there is no better way than to do that with life insurance. No better way. Now, on top of that, and then also, I'll get into the life insurance a little bit more. But on top of that, it's so important also to not start out your adult lives in debt. One of the ways that a lot of Black Americans, a lot of families have their children start off in debt is they live this great lifestyle. They have great vehicles and they're riding around in their Range Rovers and Cadillacs and have great houses and live in better neighborhoods and got the UGG boots and the Louis Vuitton bags and the coats and the trips and all this stuff. And then have the nerve to tell their kids when they go to college, you're going to have to pick up the tab. Why? Why are our kids having to pick up the tabs? You seem to have enough money to live this lifestyle. Why not have enough money to take care of your kids' college education? But that's what happens. A lot of us have the ability now to go out and buy things and to do things. And that's great and fantastic. And we're starting businesses but we forget that our kids, the true test, I believe, of wealth is having the ability to be able to send our children to college. Now, think about this. And I give a super side eye to, and this is not just a low income situation, but I give a super side eye to well-to-do African Americans. And I see a lot of them as a financial professional, well-to-do African Americans that look down on other segments of the Black community that can't do what they do, aren't living how they live, aren't able to go take these trips and have these nice cars and live in these big 8,000 square foot homes, and yet tell their kids that they have to get a student loan. I see it all the time. It is maddening to me. So I'm giving you the side eye. And this is well-to-do African Americans that do this, that look down because of the things that they have and the status that they've achieved. They have pulled themselves up by the bootstraps. And I have air quotations here. You can't see it, but I'm telling you, I'm doing air quotations, pulling themselves up by the bootstraps. And yet they are sending their kids to schools and making them get student loans. How do we know this? 85%. And there was a recent study done that shows 85% of Black students that graduated with bachelor's degrees carry student debt. That is almost 9 out of 10. That is a staggering number. And out of those 85% of people that have student debt, half of them default in 12 years. That is staggering. That's why the push for President Joe Biden to end and cancel student debt is so big and so loud. Because in the Black community, many of us, many people, including myself, have student debt, have student loans. Joe Biden needs to cancel that today. You cancel $10,000. He needs to cancel the rest of this $50,000. And so we don't have to deal with this. That's something we talk about a lot. And so instead of for us to have this grandiose lifestyle, part of the way of creating that lasting legacy and decreasing the racial wealth gap, and I've talked about this before, is starting to take care of your kids' college education, saving for their kids' college education so you can pay for that. Well, I don't have $300 to set aside for my kids, but you had $500 to set aside for that nice truck that you just bought. So, and it's a depreciating asset. So in 3 years, that truck that you purchased, which is $50,000, well, $500 payment, and there's a good rule of thumb. We just talked to Jeff Lane, new car sales, director of new car sales at Landers McClarty. He'll tell you that for average credit, every $1,000 that you finance costs you $20 in a loan. So at a $50,000 rate, that's a lot more than $500 of a payment if you don't put anything down. So our priorities are still, we need to change our priorities. Coming up on Green Talk for Brown Folks, I'm going to get back into and to put a button on this education talk, but then we're going to talk about life insurance. Is going to be the number one way that you can create generational wealth in one generation. And there are some things that people like Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman say that I do not agree with. And we are going to talk about that coming up on the other side of the break. This is Green Talk for Brown Folks with your host, Ryan Marshall. We'll be right back.
You are listening to Green Talk for Brown Folks with Ryan Marshall on HSRN.
Welcome back, everybody, to Green Talk for Brown Folks. It's your host, Ryan Marshall. We're here at segment 2, creating a lasting legacy. And I'm a little fired up this morning. My goodness, I'm sorry if I come across a little strong, but this really is a topic that really burns in my soul because I really appreciate wanting to create a lasting legacy. And I don't know if some of you have seen on my social media, and if you follow me at Ryan H. Marshall on Twitter, and then at RHM Wealth Wave on my Instagram, you may have seen a video talking about, it was a promo for this show, Green Talk for Brown Folks. And I talk about my dad being a poor immigrant from Trinidad and Tobago, and my mom growing up in a working class household in St. Louis, so they didn't have money, or money was very tight. We talk about leaving the lasting legacy. My dad didn't have a whole lot of money to leave me. He didn't have a whole lot of education. He grew up poor, didn't have anything to tell me except go to school, get a good education. Well, what's the number one way that people go to school and get a good education is, if you're poor, if you don't have a lot of money, but you want to get a piece of the American dream, you want to live that better lifestyle than to just be one of 7 poor from San Fernando, Trinidad and Tobago, is you get a loan and you go to a school that will accept you. You get good grades and then you go and you pay off, and that's all we were ever taught. Okay. And my adult life, I started off in debt. And I wish I knew some of the things that I know now 20, 30 years ago. That I think that would have served me well. I think there are a lot of families out there that they look at it and they're like, well, I don't have any money, but I want my kids to go to college and I'm banking on a scholarship. And if they don't get a scholarship, well, then they're just going to have to take these loans. Otherwise, they just going to have to go to work. And there are things that I know that we can do right now, setting aside a little bit of money. And I look at people, again, that say they don't have money, yet get a brand new car every 2 to 3 years. They get brand new shoes. You have, 10, 12, 20 pair of shoes. You fresh to death, head to toe. You got money. It's the priority of being able to say, you know what? Do I need to pay $500 or $600 for this particular car, or can I just only pay $375 or $400, save the $100 or $200 for my kids' college education, and be able to allow them to not have to start their lives in debt? That's so very important. And we talk about there are various college funds out there that you can start. If you even want to do something, just set some money aside, put it in a bank account. I know it's very low interest rate of return on that. But if you can find a college fund, and there are a lot of different ways that we talk about, creative ways that we've talked about funding your kids' college education. If you go back and go on our YouTube page, our HSRN YouTube page, you can listen. I believe it's episode 3 or 4 from season 1. We talk about some of the creative ways that you can save up for your kids' college education. And it's so very important. You have to do it. We have to move forward and move this needle, because what always seems to happen is we're back at the same spot that we were in 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago, still talking about the same deals, and the wealth gap is widening. So that's something that is really near and dear to me and near and dear to my heart. The second overarching point I want to talk about is life insurance. And one of the things that I don't agree with, and we talked about this. So before I get into that, let's back up. Life insurance is the number one way that you can create wealth and leave a lasting legacy for you and your family, period. There's no better financial vehicle than utilizing life insurance, and a well-tailored life insurance policy can really create wealth and set the narrative for you. Wealthy people are eating up life insurance, eating this up. Okay. And I'm going to tell you what it is. Now, Susie Orman, and I follow her, Dave Ramsey, I follow her. We're, it's sort of in the same space, I guess. They are a little bit larger level, but I'm not a big fan of one of the things that they talk about. They only talk about, when it comes to life insurance, buying term life insurance. Any other life insurance outside of term life insurance is a waste of time and a waste of money to them. Okay. It's, and there is this school of thought and this ideal that you buy term insurance, inexpensive term insurance, and then you invest the difference that you would have spent on a permanent policy. For the difference between a permanent cost of a permanent policy and a term policy, you invest that money in equities, in the stock market, in exchange traded funds, anything like that. That's going to give you a great rate of return. And that school of thought came from 50 or so years ago, when there was only term insurance and then there was whole life insurance. There are 4 different types of permanent policies now, and things evolve. We talk about the financial industry evolves, things evolve. But at that time, there are companies, there are people out there that still use this cookie cutter mentality of buying term and investing the difference. And I'm not saying that term insurance is bad. Some insurance is better than no insurance. But what I'm saying is the difference is, back when there was only whole life was giving you, you were paying for the policy, and a portion of your policy goes to keeping the policy in force, and the rest of it goes to your cash value. And the insurance company gives you a guaranteed rate of return. Usually it was between 3 and 5%. And so each year, your cash value goes up by 5%. Well, the school of thought was, well, why in the hell would you give your money, all this money, to the insurance company, and there are all these fees that you're paying, and they're only giving you a guaranteed rate of return of 5%. All they're doing is taking the money and reinvesting that in the stock market, making money off of your money. Why not you just do that yourself? You go pay the term insurance, and then you go turn around and use this. And this strategy is continuously used. Okay. The downside to this, and I will have to tell you, is a big part of the reason why the wealth gap is widening and Black Americans are falling farther and farther behind, is because a lot of Black Americans have listened to these strategies of buying term and investing the difference. And like I said, again, I don't see term insurance as an issue. It's the issue was that all of these people like Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman and others say that anything outside of term insurance is bad. There's nothing good about any of it. Okay, which that is, rich people seem to have no problem buying permanent policies and growing their wealth. Okay. Meanwhile, Black people continue to pass debts. They're not passing assets. I'm going to tell you why. There was a study done by Penn State University a number of years ago, looking at the fate of term life insurance policies. And they studied over 20,000 insurance policies. It had a total amount of $4 billion. Okay. in most term policies, it's temporary. It's you're basically renting the life insurance for a period. The school of thought also with guys like Dave Ramsey is insurance is only there in case you lose, in case you die early, a primary wage earner dies early, and that as you accumulate your wealth, as you get to retirement age, you should be self-insured. But that is not the reality. Most people are not self-insured by the time they get to retirement age. As a matter of fact, people are having more and more difficulty trying to sustain or even get to a place where they can even retire at all. So we've seen time and time again that school of thought hasn't panned out. But here is what this Penn State study said of these term policies. Okay, and most term policies are either 10, 20, or 30 years. Okay, more than 90% of all term policies are terminated or converted. 90%, 9 of 10. Okay, 9 of 10. 99% of term policies never pay out. And only 1% of all term insurance results in death claims. 1% of all term policies. Okay. So black folks are not passing wealth. We're passing at debt. Okay. Here's more staggering numbers. 45%, almost half of all term policies are converted in the first year. Almost half converted to something else outside of a term policy, most likely a permanent policy. 72% of all term policies are either terminated or converted within the first 3 years. That is staggering. Those are staggering numbers. So the reason why we're not passing wealth is because many African Americans, and I'm not saying term insurance is bad, but we are getting term insurance in a lot of ways instead of looking at other forms of insurance that create wealth, and do things like that, where you are able to have the insurance for the duration of your lifetime. There's more than just whole life, and I think we've talked about it. 4 different types of policies: whole life, universal life, index universal life, variable universal life. You can basically buy term and invest the difference within a life insurance policy if you wanted to do that, and be able to have the life insurance is the only vehicle where you can grow money tax-free. You can borrow money in your cash value tax-free. You can pass this on to your heirs tax-free. You can grow money with market-like return without the market downside risk. And you can do this tax-free. There's no other vehicle out there that does that. Mutual funds is a tax now vehicle. Anytime you earn any sort of earnings or capital gains, that is taxed in the year that you make it. They talk about IRAs or Roth IRAs. Well, there are restrictions placed on IRAs, or Roth IRAs. It's income restrictive. So if you make too much money, you can't do a Roth IRA. If you can't contribute more than a certain amount. So Roth IRA is a way for everyday Americans to try to invest in their retirement tax-free. There are a lot of different ways that you can utilize this. But let's jump to a break, and I'm going to button this up, and I'm going to continue this conversation here most likely next week. I have to jump to a commercial break. My producers are screaming at me, please break it off. So we're going to go button it up, segment 3. This is Green Talk for Brown Folks with your host, Ryan Marshall. We'll be right back.
You are listening to Green Talk for Brown Folks with Ryan Marshall on HSRN.
I want to continue this conversation because, and I think we're going to have to continue it next week, but we talk about life insurance being the number one way to create that lasting legacy. I talk about it all the time. Getting life insurance and ensuring that it's not just for to cover premature death of a primary wage earner, but rich and wealthy people are using this to grow wealth, grow assets, shelter their their income because, taxes are going up. And I think we've talked about this before. Taxes were slated to already go up in 2026 anyway. So not only are their taxes going up in their income, but taxes are also going up in their investments. And if you're investing in equities, then those equities are going to be taxed. So a lot of wealthy people are looking for ways, one, to reduce their taxable liability, and two, shelter their money from taxable liability down the line when those taxes do continue to go up, and looking for a way to pass wealth tax free, which is taxes are one of the biggest wealth eaters, and then also to be able to grow wealth. And they can do that either inside the stock market via a separate account with a variable universal life insurance policy, or you can grow it. You can grow at market returns with no market downside in an index universal life insurance policy. But we'll dive into that a little bit more. But I think the mantra is, I do not agree with buying term and investing the difference as just a cookie cutter approach for Black people to create not only wealth, but then also to create a lasting legacy. And as a matter of fact, because there's so many term policies that do not survive and get to a death claim, now all of a sudden people aren't, for years and years, haven't either invested the difference, or they're still struggling to pay off things like mortgages and other things like that. And now they have to downsize. They aren't able to have the type of life that they anticipated that they were going to have. And now all of a sudden you're leaving your kids or your heirs debts instead of assets. You may have left them $200,000, but if you have a $400,000 home that still needs to be paid, if you got a couple of car loans, some more student debt or some other debts, that is still debt. That's that you're still leaving less than you're leaving. So it's just tough. So we talk about those things. I really want to continue this conversation on Green Talk for Brown Folks. I think I am out of time, but thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I really, really appreciate it. Until next time, until next week, this is Ryan Marshall. We'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to Green Talk for Brown Folks with Ryan Marshall on HSRN. Follow Ryan's social media on Twitter at Ryan H. Marshall and on Instagram, RHM Wealth Wave. You can also connect with him via email at ryan.marshall@howmoneyworks.com. That's ryan.marshall@howmoneyworks.com. Join him next Friday at 1 p.m. for another edition of Green Talk for Brown Folks.